Hello, welcome to Phantom Homicide, the Villisca Axe murders, an enduring unsolved mystery. Okay, so let's really get into this one. We are diving deep into a case that, well, it just tore things apart in early 20th century America.
Right.
We're talking about the Villisca Axe murders, June 1912, an event that absolutely shattered that whole idea that, small rural towns were somehow safe from just unimaginable horror.
It's the scale, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's what's so captivating in
Yeah.
a dark way. The sheer scale and the chilling precision of it all. 8 people. You have 6 children among them,
Yeah.
bludgeoned to death in one single night inside this house in a town where
Yeah.
everyone knew everyone.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's still unsolved over a century later, I mean, despite trials, investigations, suspects,
Mhm.
it just hangs there. It makes you question so much about how things worked back then. Safety, justice,
Yeah.
everything.
Absolutely. So our mission here for this deep dive is really to trace that terrifying sequence. We want to follow the Moore family's last hours, really pick apart the crime scene, which, well, the investigation itself is kind of a disaster in some ways. A huge disaster, yeah.
And then, crucially, spend the time needed to look closely at this long, long list of suspects. I mean, really compelling suspects. We're talking local rivals,
Mm-hmm.
a minister who was, let's say, troubled,
Mm-hmm.
and even this truly chilling theory, the idea of a traveling serial killer moving through the country.
Okay, so to really get the impact, you have to understand who the Moores were in Villisca. Josiah B. Moore, JB, he was what, 43?
Yeah, 43.
And he wasn't just some guy. He was prominent, affluent for the time and place. He'd built up a really successful business, landed the John Deere franchise. That was huge back then, especially in an agricultural community like Montgomery County, Iowa. Gave him status.
And right there, that prominence, that's where some of the first threads of, well, potential motives start appearing.
Mm-hmm.
Because before he struck out on his own, Josiah worked for 9 years for Frank Jones.
Right, the hardware store owner.
Exactly. Who's also a state politician.
Yeah.
A big deal in town. And when Moore left, he didn't just open a shop on the other side of town. No.
Yeah.
He set up directly across the street from Jones. Wow. That's bold.
It's incredibly bold. It's not just business competition, it's personal. It's playing out right there on Main Street every single day. And that rivalry, well, it definitely comes up later in the investigation. Big time.
Yeah, you can see how that would fester. That kind of direct competition in a small town where business and social standing are all tangled up, it breeds resentment. Powerful resentment.
Mm-hmm.
And Josiah had married Sarah Montgomery back in 1899. By 1912, they had the 4 kids. Herman, he was 11. Catherine, 10, Arthur, 7, and little Paul, just 5 years old. The whole extended Moore family, Josiah's parents, siblings, they were woven into the fabric of Villisca. These weren't outsiders. They were pillars, which makes what happened feel like an attack on the whole community.
So that Sunday, June 9th, 1912, it starts off pretty normal, maybe even happy, celebratory. It was the annual Children's Day program, big event at the newly built Presbyterian church. And Sarah Moore, Josiah's wife, she was actually the one coordinating the whole program.
Right, so she and the kids were right at the center of this community event that evening.
Exactly. But they weren't the only kids heading back to the Moore house that night, and this is critical. They had guests. 2 young sisters, Ina Mae Stillinger, she was 8, and her older sister, Lena Gertrude, who was 12.
And they weren't just local kids, right? They lived a ways out.
Yeah, their family had a wealthy farm about 7 miles out of town. And the record shows, around 6 p.m. that evening, Josiah called the Stillinger place. He spoke to their oldest sister, Blanche, and asked if Ina Mae and Lena could stay the night at the Moore house.
That phone call. Chilling to think about it now. That single moment sealed their fate.
It really did. So the whole group, the Moores and the Stillinger girls, they walked home from the church, probably arrived sometime after 9:30 p.m. It wasn't far, maybe a 5-minute walk. But here's a key point the investigation could never nail down. Did they eat or drink anything when they got back?
Ah, right. The sedative theory.
Exactly, because later on, investigators wondered if the killer might have used something, maybe laced some milk or cocoa, to make sure everyone was deeply asleep. But they could never confirm if the family consumed anything after returning home. It's just another frustrating blank spot.
So the sleeping arrangements, this basically maps out the path the killer took. Upstairs, you had Josiah and Sarah in the master bedroom. And then in the adjacent room, all 4 more children were together. Herman, Catherine, Arthur, and Paul.
All in one room.
All in one room.
So-
And downstairs in what was called the sewing room, or sometimes the guest room, were the 2 Stillinger sisters, Ina Mae and Lena. Apparently the Moores had recently put a twin bed in there, maybe for Catherine originally, and the 2 girls were sort of wedged into that single bed together.
And then silence. Night falls. Later, doctors really struggled to pin down the exact time of death. Their estimates were pretty broad, somewhere between midnight and 5 a.m. is the general window.
Although some sources try to narrow it maybe midnight to 2 a.m.
Right, but either way, you're talking about a killer being active inside that house for potentially hours, 3 hours, maybe more, methodically moving room to room, committing mass murder. And apparently, nobody heard a thing. No screams reported, no sounds that alerted the neighbors, just absolute silence. Okay, this is where it really takes a turn from timeline to just sheer terror, because the brutality, the violence itself, it suggests this incredible, uncontrolled rage. But then, the things the killer did afterwards, they suggest something else. Cold, calculated, almost ritualistic. It's this bizarre mix.
It really is. The weapon itself was horribly simple.
Well,
An axe. Investigators believed it was taken right from the Moore's own coal shed. Easy access. The attack sequence seems to have started upstairs. Master bedroom, probably sometime after midnight.
Josiah Moore, JB, was likely the first. Then his wife, Sarah. And there's this detail about how the axe was used. One source mentions the sharp edge might have been used just once on Josiah, maybe to minimize blood spatter initially.
Maybe. Though if that was the plan, it didn't work, or wasn't the main approach. Because Sarah, and all the kids, and most of the attack on Josiah himself, it was done with the blunt end of the axe. The pole of the axe.
The blunt end, that's just brutal. Why do that?
The sharp edge is faster,
You know,
cleaner, in a grim way.
Exactly. Using the blunt end takes more effort. It's more destructive. It suggests a desire not just to end a life, but to obliterate, annihilate. It's personal. And the killer was methodical. Moved from the parents' room to the next room where the 4 more children slept, then downstairs. To the parlor bedroom, the sewing room, where the Stillinger sisters were, 8 people, all bludgeoned, likely in their sleep, mostly.
But it didn't stop there. And this is what makes it even more disturbing. The killer wasn't finished. After killing the children, he, or she, we assume he, went back upstairs, back to the master bedroom, and attacked Josiah and Sarah again. Their bodies already deceased. It's called overkill, but this goes beyond. The estimates are horrifying. Josiah was struck something like 30 times. The force was so extreme, so focused, it left the parents' faces completely unrecognizable. There were actual gouge marks from the axe on the walls, even on the ceiling.
Gouge marks on the ceiling from the force of the blows.
Yes. It's almost unimaginable rage.
Mm.
And in that frenzy, a small detail, the killer apparently knocked over a shoe in the master bedroom, a shoe that had filled with blood from the earlier attack. It suggests even in that secondary rage, there was maybe a moment of clumsiness, a slight disruption to the careful movement.
And then the switch flips from this frenzied violence to these incredibly strange, almost ceremonial actions afterwards.
Yes, the postmortem staging. This is what makes Villisca so unique and haunting.
The mirrors, that's the most famous part. The killer walked through the house and covered every single mirror, every reflective surface. How? By taking clothes, dresses, sheath, whatever was available, out of dressers and carefully draping them over the glass. Why? Why take the time?
Well, it's fascinating because, as the source material points out, covering mirrors during wakes or after a death was actually, well, not unheard of back then. It was a folk practice, a superstition, maybe to keep the deceased spirit from being trapped, or perhaps so the living wouldn't see their own grief reflected, or even see the ghost.
So the killer might have been drawing on some kind of known ritual.
Possibly. Or it could be entirely part of their own disturbed psychology, trying to avoid seeing their own reflection, or maybe trying to prevent the victim's spirits from witnessing. We just don't know. But it took time. It was deliberate.
And it wasn't just the mirrors. They blacked out the house, every window blind, pulled down. And the 2 windows that didn't have blinds, they found pieces of the family's own clothing hung up to block the view, completely sealing the scene off.
Total isolation. Then there's the kitchen. The murder weapon, the axe, was left leaning against the wall downstairs in the room where the Stillinger girls were found.
Just left there.
Just left there. And right next to it, on the floor, this 4-pound slab of bacon taken from the icebox.
The bacon. Okay, I have to ask again. Any theories? Why bacon?
Absolutely doesn't make any sense. It's just
Yeah.
baffling. It adds to that feeling of ritual or maybe just complete irrationality.
Mm-hmm.
And there's more in the kitchen. The killer washed their hands. They found a pail of water on the kitchen table, and it was bloody.
Okay, so they cleaned up.
They cleaned up, and then apparently they fixed themselves a plate. Some beans, some bread. It was found sitting right there on the table, untouched, next to the bowl of bloody water.
Untouched food, so they didn't actually eat.
Doesn't seem like it. Maybe they intended to. Maybe it was part of the ritual, the staging. But the sheer nerve to commit this horror, stage the scene, wash up, prepare food.
Mm-hmm.
It speaks to an absolute lack of panic,
Yeah.
incredible confidence or detachment.
And then they just leave. Around 5 a.m., they walk out, locking the front door behind them with a key they must have taken from inside the house. Like they owned the place, like they just finished a job.
And there's one more deeply disturbing element. Lena Stillinger, the 12-year-old. Investigators came to believe that, unlike the others, she might not have been asleep when the attack reached her.
Why did they think that?
She was found lying sort of crosswise on the bed, not neatly tucked in. And crucially, she had a defensive wound on her arm, like she'd raised it to try and block a blow.
Oh, God. So she was awake. She saw it coming.
It seems very likely. And the condition of her body, it raised immediate flags about motive. Her body had been moved after death. Her nightgown was pushed up or her undergarments removed, and her leg was positioned in a way that deliberately exposed her genitalia.
Which led police to think sexual assault.
Exactly. Attempted sexual molestation was the immediate thought. But here's the thing. Later, more thorough examinations, even with the limits of the time, found no definitive physical evidence of actual sexual assault.
So what does that mean? The positioning? The clothing?
Yeah.
It wasn't assault.
It might mean the intent was sexual, or it might mean it was part of the killer's broader psychological disturbance, degradation, a final act of violation that wasn't necessarily physical completion, or maybe part of the ritual aspect again. It muddies the motive waters even further. Was it revenge against Josiah? Or was there this darker sexual element focused on Lena? Or both? Or neither, if it was a random killer?
It just adds layer upon layer of horror and confusion. So, this incredibly disturbing scene, the meticulous staging, the sheer violence, it's all discovered on Monday morning, Juneteenth. But how it was discovered and what happened next? Well, that became almost as infamous as the crime itself, an absolute mess.
It really did. The ball got rolling around 7 a.m. A neighbor, Mary Peckham, noticed something was wrong. The Moore house was usually bustling early, but it was unnaturally quiet. Curtains still drawn. That wasn't like them.
So she went over.
She knocked. No answer. Found the door was locked. Feeling uneasy, she called Josiah's brother, Ross Moore.
Did Ross have a key?
He did. He came over, used his copy of the house key, unlocked the front door, and stepped into the parlor. And right there he saw them, the bodies of the two Stillinger girls.
Oh, wow. He just walked right in on them.
He did. And to his credit, she didn't go further. He immediately backed out, went back to Peckham, and told her to get Hank Horton, who was Villisca's main law enforcement officer, their town marshal.
So Horton arrives.
Horton arrives, goes through the house, and confirms the absolute horror. All 8 victims. That's when things really start to unravel from an investigative standpoint. Around 8:40 a.m., the town's telephone exchange operator puts out an all-call. Basically alerts every connected household in town that there's been a massacre at the Moore house.
An all-call. So they basically just announced it to the whole town.
Pretty much. Which raises that critical question you alluded to earlier. How does a small-town marshal in 1912 handle a scene like this? Before state police, before modern forensics, before crime scene tape was even really a thing.
The answer is badly.
Disastrously. That all-call acted like an open invitation. The house became a spectacle. People flooded towards it.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes.
How?
The contamination was immediate and catastrophic. Within just a couple of hours, estimates say around 100 people had walked through that crime scene, trampling potential evidence, destroying any bloody footprints that might have existed outside or inside.
100 people inside the house.
Inside, outside, peering in windows. Total chaos. And it gets worse. People picked up the murder weapon, the axe, passed it around, looking at it.
They handled the murder weapon.
They handled the murder weapon. Any chance of fingerprints? Gone. Any trace evidence on the handle? Compromised. And maybe the most gruesome part, souvenir hunters. Some locals actually chipped off and stole pieces of Josiah's skull fragments as morbid keepsakes before the scene was properly secured.
That is beyond words. Just sickening. A complete breakdown of everything.
Marshal Horton and the county sheriff, Warren Jackson, they were just completely swamped, utterly overwhelmed. The county coroner, Dr. Lindquist, he got there around 9 a.m. And apparently he was furious. He saw the chaos, understood immediately what was happening to the evidence, and urged the sheriff to call in the National Guard.
The National Guard?
Yes. They finally arrived and established a secure perimeter around 10:30 a.m., but by then, the damage was done. Hours of contamination. The critical first moments were lost forever.
Was there any attempt at documentation early on? Photos?
Ironically, yes. A local druggist who did photography as a hobby showed up, ready to take pictures, which would have been invaluable, right?
Absolutely vital.
He was turned away. told that taking pictures would be too ghoulish.
Too ghoulish, but souvenir hunting skull fragments wasn't.
Exactly. It highlights the bizarre priorities and the sheer lack of procedure. Meanwhile, drugstores back then sometimes sold postcards of sensational crime scenes. So there was this weird mix of public gawking, morbid curiosity, and a complete failure to preserve evidence professionally.
And the bodies themselves, they weren't removed quickly either, were they?
Not at all. The coroner's jury was called later that afternoon, but the bodies, they weren't actually removed from the house until almost 2 a.m. the next morning, Tuesday morning.
So nearly 24 hours after the murders likely occurred.
Roughly 24 hours, lying there in an unsecured house initially, then a secured house, but still 24 hours. In June, in Iowa.
The decomposition alone. Any chance of determining time of death accurately or finding subtle biological evidence must have just evaporated. Why the delay?
It seems like a combination of things. Bureaucracy waiting for the official coroner's jury to do their examination on site, and just capacity. They weren't set up to handle 8 bodies from a complex crime scene all at once. They eventually took them to the fire station, which served as a temporary morgue.
This whole initial response.
Yeah.
It's a case study in how not to handle a crime scene. And on top of the contamination, you had the limits of the technology back then.
Exactly. Fingerprinting wasn't standard practice yet. Not really used effectively by local police. Toxicology, testing for drugs or sedatives, not routine. So that whole theory about the killer drugging the family, it remained just speculation.
So much potentially crucial evidence just lost. Gone forever because of the chaos and the era.
But a few strange things did emerge, despite everything. Investigators found that imprint in the hay in the barn. Looked like someone had been lying there, watching the house through a knothole. The watcher theory.
Suggesting premeditation, patience.
Yes. And then the attic clues. This one's a bit debated. Some early accounts and some sources mentioned 2 spent cigarettes found up there, suggesting the killer hid in the attic, maybe got in through an unlocked door or window earlier, smoked while they waited for the family to fall asleep.
Well, wait, I thought other sources, especially related to the house tours now, say definitively no cigarettes were found. That's a major contradiction.
It is. And it's a persistent point of confusion. Did investigators find them and they got lost in the chaos? Were they misreported? Or were they never there? If the cigarettes were there, it points to someone waiting inside for hours. If not, maybe the killer entered later after they were asleep. It changes the timeline, the killer's movements, another frustrating ambiguity.
But the waiting theory is supported by that lamp, right?
Right, the lamp found upstairs, a kerosene or gas lamp with a glass chimney removed, set on the floor, wick turned down really low, just enough light to see by, maybe, but not enough to be noticed from outside. That feels very deliberate, very planned.
And a couple of other small, strange items. A fragment of a keychain, found downstairs. Definitely didn't belong to the Moores. Never identified.
A tiny, tantalizing clue that led nowhere. And maybe the most significant lack of a clue for certain motives. Josiah's wallet, it was still in his pocket, full of cash.
Ruling out robbery.
Completely ruling out robbery as the primary motive. This wasn't about money. It was about something else. Revenge. Ritual. Rage. That's what the investigation had to figure out, with almost no physical evidence left to guide them. So, with the physical evidence basically destroyed or hopelessly compromised, the entire investigation shifted. It became purely about motive, opportunity, and character. And that generated this absolute maze of suspects, a list that would haunt Villisca and investigators for decades.
Okay, so we've got this meticulously planned, yet savagely executed, ritualistic mass murder. The crime scenes are right off. So who did they look at? Who were the main players in this dark drama?
You can sort of group them. You've got the local angle, the rivals, the personal grudges. You've got the disturbed individuals who maybe became obsessed. And then you have the chilling possibility of an outsider, a transient killer.
Let's start local. Theory A, Frank F. Jones, the business rival. This feels like the most classic small-town motive, right? Revenge.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Jones was powerful. State senator, Josiah Moore's former boss. And remember, Moore didn't just leave Jones's employ. He set up a competing store directly across the street and snagged the John Deere franchise Jones presumably wanted or had. That's direct public humiliation and financial competition.
And there were rumors, too, weren't there? Something about Jones's family.
Persistent rumors. That Josiah Moore was having an affair with Jones's daughter-in-law, Donna. Now, no actual evidence ever backed that up. It might have just been gossip, but true or not, if Jones believed it or even just heard the rumors.
It adds another layer. Eliminating a business rival and someone potentially dishonoring his family, it makes Jones a prime suspect, at least for
A
motive.
very strong motive.
Yeah.
But Jones was a state senator, prominent, maybe too prominent to swing the axe himself, which leads directly into Theory B. William Insane Blackie Mansfield, the hired gun theory.
Right. The idea that Jones didn't do it himself but paid someone else. Who is Mansfield?
Mansfield was a character, an ex-convict, former U.S. Army soldier, reportedly a cocaine addict. A private investigator named James Wilkerson became fixated on Mansfield, believing he was not just a hired killer, but potentially a serial killer responsible for similar crimes.
Similar crimes. You mean other axe murders?
Exactly. Wilkerson saw striking parallels between Villisca and other unsolved axe murders around that time. He specifically linked Mansfield to a family slaying in Colorado Springs, Colorado, about 9 months before Villisca, then later murders in Ellsworth and Paola, Kansas, and another one in Blue Island, Illinois in 1914.
And what were the parallels? How similar were these crimes?
Terrifyingly similar. Wilkerson laid out a pattern, an MO that matched Villisca almost perfectly.
Yeah.
Victims killed with the blunt end of an axe, often in their beds. Mirrors covered this scene. A lamp left burning, often with the chimney removed, near the bodies. A basin of bloody water found, suggesting the killer watched up.
Wow. That's specific.
Very specific. And Wilkerson added another detail. In some of these linked cases, the killer seemed to wear gloves.
Huh.
Wilkerson argued this, pointed to someone like Mansfield, who knew his fingerprints were already on file from his time in Leavenworth Prison. He was trying not to leave prints.
Okay, that sounds incredibly compelling. Did they arrest Mansfield?
They did, finally, in 1916, based largely on Wilkerson's investigation linking him to these crimes and potentially to Jones. But Mansfield produced an alibi. Payroll records that supposedly proved he was working in Illinois at the exact time of the Villisca murders.
An alibi, so case closed on Mansfield.
Not quite. The alibi got him released, and he actually sued Wilkerson for wrongful prosecution and won. But the alibi itself has always been debated. Because later, a man named R.H. Thorpe, who owned a restaurant in Shenandoah, the next town over from Villisca,
Yeah.
Thorpe came forward and identified Mansfield. He said he clearly remembered seeing Mansfield board an early morning train in Shenandoah the day after the murders. Thorpe claimed Mansfield said he'd walked all the way from Villisca.
Wait, so an eyewitness puts him near the scene, directly contradicting the payroll alibi.
Exactly. It throws the whole thing into question. Was the payroll alibi faked? Did Jones help arrange it? Or was Thorpe mistaken? Thorpe's testimony was largely dismissed at the time, maybe because the focus was so heavily on Jones locally, or maybe the alibi seemed stronger. But it leaves Mansfield hanging there as this deeply suspicious figure whose MO fits perfectly.
And there was something else, wasn't there? Someone overheard a plot.
Right. A woman named Vina Tompkins reportedly claimed she was going to testify that she'd overheard 3 men in the woods near Villisca shortly before the murders, plotting to kill the Moore family. This could tie back to the Jones-Mansfield theory. Maybe Jones didn't hire just one person. Or maybe it was unrelated. Her testimony never fully materialized in a way that led to convictions. It just added another layer of conspiracy.
Okay, so that's the local rival hired killer angle. What about someone acting alone, maybe someone already in town?
That brings us to Theory C, Reverend George Kelly, the disturbed clergyman. This shifts the motive away from revenge or money toward something more internal, psychological.
Who was Reverend Kelly?
He was an English-born traveling minister. People described him as peculiar, odd. He had a documented history of mental health issues, including breakdowns. He also had a history of voyeurism, peeping, and had apparently solicited young women, even girls, to pose nude for him. A very troubled individual.
And he was in Villisca.
He was right there. He'd been invited to teach at the Children's Day services on Sunday, June 9th, the very event the Moores and Stillingers attended just hours before they were killed.
Okay, that puts him at the scene, timing-wise. When did he leave?
His departure is incredibly suspicious in hindsight. He left Villisca on an early train, somewhere between 5 a.m. and 5:50 a.m. on Monday, June 10th, just before Mary Peckham noticed something was wrong and the bodies were discovered.
Wow, that's tight timing. Did he act suspiciously afterwards?
Extremely. He developed this intense, almost obsessive fascination with the murders. He wrote numerous very long, very detailed letters to investigators, to newspapers, claiming he'd heard things that night, maybe saw shadows, basically inserting himself directly into the narrative over and over again.
Like he knew more than he was saying or wanted the attention.
Possibly both. His behavior was erratic enough that he eventually got arrested in 1914, but for something else, sending obscene materials through the mail. That gave authorities a reason to hold him and really dig into his potential connection to Villisca.
Did they get anything?
They arrested him specifically for the Villisca murders in 1917. And after hours and hours of intense interrogation, they got a confession.
A confession.
Yes, but Kelly quickly recanted it. He claimed he'd been coerced, and he also claimed he was possessed by demons or another voice that made him do it. Given his known history of mental illness and the circumstances of the confession, it was largely discredited by the time it went to trial.
So the confession didn't stick.
No. He was tried twice. The first trial ended with a hung jury. They couldn't agree. The second trial, he was acquitted. He walked free. But the suspicion, it never really went away. His presence, his timing, his obsession, the confession, it keeps him firmly on the list of credible suspects.
Were there any other purely local suspects who gained traction?
A couple were looked at, but less intensely. Samuel Moyer, who was Josiah Moore's brother-in-law, apparently he'd made threats against Josiah in the past over family arguments.
Okay.
But he had a solid alibi for the night of the murders.
Okay.
And then there was Andrew Sawyer, a transient kind of a drifter who showed up after the murders and seemed obsessed with them. The police even found him sleeping fully clothed with an axe beside his bed.
That sounds suspicious.
Extremely. But they could never link him directly. He might have just been one of those people morbidly drawn to sensational crimes. He was questioned but never charged. Fell into that category of creepy, but probably not the killer.
So that leaves the most unsettling possibility, perhaps. The idea that it wasn't personal, it wasn't local, it was random. Theory E, the traveling serial killer.
This is the theory that looks beyond Villisca and sees a potential pattern. First, there was Henry Lee Moore. No relation to the victims, despite the name. He was convicted of murdering his own mother and grandmother with an axe in Missouri several months after the Villisca murders.
With an axe, with the details similar.
Strikingly similar in some ways. Enough that investigators at the time strongly suspected he might have been responsible for Villisca too, maybe ramping up to killing his own family. He denied it. The timing is slightly off, but the MO kept his name in the mix.
But the bigger theory now involves someone else. Right, the man from the train.
Exactly. This gained huge traction with the 2017 book, The Man from the Train. It didn't just look at Villisca in isolation. It connected it to potentially dozens of other unsolved axe murders that occurred primarily along railroad lines across the country, particularly between 1911 and 1912. Yes. The research points to a potential single perpetrator, a man possibly named Paul Mueller, or Miller, who may have been responsible for an incredible spree of violence. The book links Villisca to crimes in Colorado, Kansas, Illinois, even potentially connecting to the infamous Axeman of New Orleans killings later on. Mueller himself had been a suspect in a similar family axe murder way back in 1897.
And the MO matches Villisca.
Perfectly. Targeting families, often near railway lines for easy arrival and escape, using an axe found on the property. The overkill, the ritualistic elements like covering mirrors, the lamp, washing up afterwards. The sheer number of cases with these specific peculiar similarities is staggering.
That's terrifying, because it means the Moores weren't targeted for who they were.
Exactly. If this theory is correct, Josiah's business rivalry, the rumors, Reverend Kelly's strangeness, none of it mattered. The Moore family and the Stillinger girls, they were simply in the wrong house, in the wrong town, near a railroad track on the night when this phantom killer passed through. They were anonymous victims in a much larger, horrifying pattern.
A shadow who just moved on to the next town.
A shadow who used the expanding railroad network to travel, kill, and disappear, leaving devastated communities and baffled police forces behind him.
So after all this time, all these theories, all these suspects, Villisca remains officially unsolved. And as we've really laid out, it comes down to two main tragic reasons. First, that crime scene, contaminated almost immediately, losing vital clues within hours.
Absolutely. The window for gathering good physical evidence slammed shut before it barely opened.
And second, just the limitations of the time. 1912 forensics couldn't do what we can do today. No DNA, rudimentary fingerprinting, limited toxicology. The evidence they needed to definitively link any of these compelling suspects, Jones's maybe hired gun Mansfield, the disturbed Reverend Kelly, or this possible traveling phantom Mueller, it just wasn't there, or it was destroyed.
It's a profoundly frustrating cold case because there are so many plausible scenarios, yet none could ever be proven beyond a reasonable doubt.
And the impact. This case wasn't just a local tragedy, it resonated across America. It was one of the first real media frenzy murder cases. Newspapers everywhere covered it relentlessly, and it fundamentally changed how people felt about safety, especially in rural areas. That idea that small towns were safe havens, Villisca shattered it.
Completely. It proved that this kind of extreme violence wasn't just an urban problem. It could happen anywhere to anyone. It tapped into a deep national anxiety.
And that legacy is literally embedded in the house itself today. It was restored back in the 1990s, taken back to how it looked in 1912, and now
It's a tourist destination.
a macabre tourist destination, yeah. People take tours, they even offer overnight stays. And a huge part of the appeal, or the draw, is the folklore. The stories of hauntings, the idea that the spirits of the victims, or maybe even the killer, are still somehow present in that house. It taps into that enduring mystery.
8 lives taken in one night, and the house still stands, holding its secrets. And maybe that's the final chilling thought. If you connect Villisca to the bigger picture, what does it really tell us? A century of looking. Multiple trials, suspects, theories, decades of advances in forensic science that can solve other cold cases. Yet this one, still impenetrable. The killer's rituals, their identity, remain shrouded.
Yeah.
Maybe it suggests that the simplest theory, the man from the train, the anonymous transient killer, maybe that's the most plausible and the most terrifying. Because it proves that sometimes the greatest danger isn't the enemy you know, it's the shadow passing through, the one who just walks away down those tracks and vanishes, leaving nothing behind but questions and ghosts.
Okay, so we hope you liked our today's discussion. For more such discussion, subscribe to our channel, Phantom Homicide.